My name is Emma Carter, and until the day of my wedding, I believed the hardest part of getting married was finding the right person. I was wrong. Sometimes the hardest part is discovering who the people around that person really are. 3 years ago, I stood in front of more than 100 people wearing a white wedding dress, smiling for photographs, while the woman who was supposed to become my mother-in-law looked at me like I was an embarrassment she had been forced to tolerate. I still remember the way she smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the kind of smile people give when they think they have already won. Then, in front of everyone, she said something I will never forget. "Emma, before you become part of this family, maybe you should understand something. My son could have married someone much better." The room went completely silent. I looked at my fiancé, Daniel. He didn't say anything. That hurt more than her words. But what nobody in that room knew was that I had already discovered the truth about Daniel's family, and I had been waiting for the right moment to reveal it. That moment had finally arrived. But let me start at the beginning, because the story of what happened at my wedding didn't begin on my wedding day. It began 6 months earlier, when I met Daniel's family for the first time. I was 29 years old, working as a project coordinator for a small design company in Chicago. My life wasn't glamorous, but I was proud of it. I paid my own bills, I had a small apartment, I had a good job, and I had spent most of my adult life believing that if I worked hard and treated people honestly, life would eventually reward me. Then I met Daniel. He was 32. Confident without being arrogant, funny without trying too hard, and surprisingly thoughtful. We met at a friend's birthday dinner. I almost didn't go that night. I'd been working late and wanted nothing more than to go home, order takeout, and watch television. But my friend Sarah insisted. "Just come for an hour," she said. That 1 hour changed my life. Daniel was sitting across the table from me. At first, we barely spoke. But later, when everyone else started leaving, he walked me to my car. We talked for nearly 40 minutes. The next morning, he texted me. Then he texted me again. Within a few weeks, we were seeing each other almost every day. Daniel told me about his family early in our relationship. His father, Richard, owned a successful construction company. His mother, Victoria, managed most of the family's financial affairs. They lived in a beautiful house outside the city. Daniel also had a younger sister named Claire. From the way Daniel described them, I expected his family to be close. Maybe a little wealthy, maybe a little formal, but close. I was wrong about that too. The first time Daniel invited me to dinner at his parents' house, I spent almost an hour choosing what to wear. I didn't want to look too casual. I didn't want to look like I was trying too hard. Eventually, I chose a simple navy dress. Daniel picked me up at 7. On the drive there, I asked him, "Are you nervous?" He laughed. "Why would I be nervous?" "Because I'm meeting your parents." "You'll be fine." Then he paused. "My mom can be intense." I smiled. "How intense?" He looked at me for a second. "Just don't take everything she says personally." I should have listened more carefully. When we arrived, Victoria opened the front door. She was elegant, perfectly dressed, and had the kind of presence that made people immediately straighten their backs. She looked at me from head to toe. Not for 1 second did she smile. Then she looked at Daniel. "This is Emma?" Daniel nodded. "Yes, Mom." Victoria finally looked back at me. "Come in." That was it. No hello, no welcome, no handshake, nothing. During dinner, she asked me questions. Where did I work? How much did I make? Where did my parents live? Did I own my apartment? What did my father do? What did my mother do? I answered politely. Then she asked, "And what exactly do you plan to contribute to Daniel's life?" I thought she was joking. She wasn't. Daniel immediately said, "Mom." But Victoria continued, "I'm only asking because marriage is a serious decision." I smiled politely. I agree. I think both people should contribute emotionally, financially, and practically. She raised an eyebrow. And financially? I support myself. She smiled. That's not what I asked. For the first time that night, I felt uncomfortable. But I didn't want to create a problem. So I simply said, "Daniel and I haven't really discussed finances in detail yet." Victoria leaned back. "That's probably something you should discuss before marriage." I agreed. Later that night, when Daniel drove me home, I told him I felt like his mother didn't like me. He shook his head. She's just protective. She asked me how much money I make. That's how she is? She asked what my parents do. I know. She asked what I would contribute to your life. Daniel sighed. Emma, my mom is difficult, but she's not a bad person. I wanted to believe him, so I did. A few months later, Daniel proposed. It happened on a cold Saturday evening. He took me to the restaurant where we had our first official date. After dinner, he took me outside. There were lights hanging over the patio. He got down on one knee. I started crying before he even asked the question. Emma Carter, will you marry me? I said yes. Of course I said yes. For the next few weeks, I was happier than I had ever been. We started planning the wedding. I imagined the usual things: flowers, music, dancing, family photographs, a beautiful dinner, and a future with the man I loved. But Victoria had other plans. She insisted on controlling almost everything: the venue, the guest list, the flowers, the menu, even my wedding dress. At first, I tried to be understanding. This is probably important to her, I told myself, but then things became strange. One afternoon, Victoria called me. Emma, I think you should reconsider the dress. I was standing in the middle of a bridal shop. What do you mean? The one you chose is too simple. I laughed nervously. I like simple. Daniel's family doesn't do simple. I didn't know how to respond. She continued. You should look like you belong beside my son. I swallowed. I think Daniel likes the dress. She became quiet. Then she said, Daniel doesn't always know what's best for him. That sentence stayed in my mind. A week later, she invited me to lunch. I thought maybe she wanted to build a better relationship. Instead, she handed me a folder. What is this? I asked. Prenuptial agreement. I stared at the papers. Daniel had never mentioned one. Victoria smiled. It's standard in our family. I read through the first few pages. There were complicated financial terms: assets, inheritance, property, business ownership. I didn't understand everything. I'll have my lawyer review this, I said. Victoria's expression changed. Your lawyer? Yes. You don't have a lawyer. I can find one. She leaned toward me. Emma, don't make this more complicated than it needs to be. I just want to understand what I'm signing. She stared at me. Then she said something that made my stomach turn. People from your background sometimes misunderstand how families like ours handle money. I looked at her. My background? She smiled. I didn't mean anything by it. But she had. And we both knew it. I told Daniel about the conversation that night. He looked uncomfortable. I'll talk to her. Please do. He did. At least that's what he told me. For a while, things seemed better. Then, 2 months before the wedding, something happened that changed everything. I received an email from an unfamiliar address. There was no subject, only one sentence. Ask Daniel why your name was removed from the house documents. I stared at the screen. I didn't understand. What house documents? I called Daniel. He answered immediately. Hey, what's up? Did you remove my name from something? Silence. What are you talking about? I got an email. What email? I forwarded it to him. A few minutes later, he called back. It's spam. How do you know? Because I don't know what they're talking about. I wanted to believe him, but something didn't feel right. 2 days later, another email arrived. This time there was an attachment. It was a scanned document. I opened it. It was a property agreement. Daniel's name was on it. So was Victoria's. And there was a third name. A woman I had never heard of. Her name was Lauren Mitchell. The document showed that Lauren had recently received a large financial transfer from a company connected to Daniel's father. I didn't understand why. I called Daniel again. He became angry. Emma, I told you, someone is messing with you. Then explain Lauren Mitchell. I don't know who she is. She's connected to your family's company. I said I don't know her. I wanted to believe him, but now I couldn't. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about all the little things I had ignored, Victoria's questions, the prenup, the strange emails, Daniel's reaction. And then I remembered something, a conversation I'd overheard 3 weeks earlier. Daniel had been talking to his mother on the phone. I hadn't been listening, but I heard one sentence. She doesn't know yet. At the time, I thought they were talking about the wedding. Now I wasn't sure. The next morning, I did something I had never done before. I started investigating, not because I wanted revenge, because I wanted the truth. I checked public business records. I looked at the companies owned by Daniel's father. I searched the names on the documents, and after several hours, I discovered something shocking. Lauren Mitchell had been connected to Daniel's family for years, not as an employee, not as a business partner, as a former girlfriend of Daniel. I sat there staring at my computer. Former girlfriend. I called Daniel. He answered. Emma? Who is Lauren Mitchell? Silence. Long silence. Then he said, Where did you hear that name? That was all I needed, because if she meant nothing, he would have simply said, She's nobody. Instead, he asked how I knew. I said, So you do know her? Emma, it's complicated. Then explain it. He sighed. Lauren and I dated years ago. How many years? Before I met you. Why is she receiving money from your family's company? I don't know. Why is her name on the document? I don't know. Why did you hide her from me? I didn't hide her. You never told me she existed. Because it wasn't important. I laughed. It wasn't important? No. Then why does your mother know her? Another silence. Then Daniel said, Please trust me. I wanted to, more than anything. But trust doesn't survive on words alone. It survives on truth. And I still didn't have the truth. A week later, something even worse happened. I went to Victoria's house to drop off some wedding invitations. I rang the doorbell. Nobody answered. I knew Daniel was at work. I was about to leave when I heard voices inside. Victoria. And another woman. I couldn't hear everything. Then I heard my name. I froze. I moved closer to the door. Victoria said, Once they're married, it will be too late for her to do anything. The other woman asked, Are you sure? Victoria replied, Absolutely. My heart started racing. Then I heard another sentence. Daniel will sign everything once the wedding is over. I stepped away from the door. I didn't wait to hear more. I got into my car and drove home. For the first time since I met Daniel, I was genuinely afraid. Not physically, emotionally. I was afraid that the man I loved had been part of a plan I didn't understand. I spent the entire night thinking. Then I made a decision. I would not confront anyone yet. Instead, I would find out exactly what they were planning. Over the next 3 weeks, I quietly collected every document I could legally access. I reviewed the prenup. I spoke to an attorney. I checked the property records. I examined the business documents. And eventually, I discovered the real plan. The house Daniel and I were supposed to live in after the wedding was not actually ours. It belonged to a family trust. And according to the documents, Daniel would receive control of the trust only after he married. But there was another condition. If Daniel divorced within a certain period, a large portion of the property would remain under Victoria's control. Then I found something else. The prenup didn't just protect the family's existing assets. It contained a clause that would allow the family to control certain assets I might acquire during the marriage. My lawyer looked at me and said, "You should not sign this." I asked, "Why?" "Because this isn't a normal prenuptial agreement. It's heavily one-sided." I felt sick. Then I asked the question I had been avoiding. "Do you think Daniel knows?" My lawyer didn't answer immediately. Finally, she said, "I don't know." That was the worst answer, because I didn't know either. I still loved him. That's what made everything so painful. If I hated Daniel, leaving would have been easy. But I didn't hate him. I loved him. I remembered our first date, our first kiss, the night he proposed, the way he held my hand when I was nervous. I wanted those memories to be real, so I confronted him. I invited him to my apartment. When he arrived, I placed the documents on the table. He looked at them, then he looked at me. "Where did you get these?" "Does it matter?" "Emma, did you know?" He sat down. For several seconds he said nothing. Finally he whispered, "Some of it." My heart broke. Some of it? I knew my parents wanted the marriage to protect the family assets. I stared at him. Protect the family assets? Yes. So that's why you proposed? No. Then why didn't you tell me? I was afraid. Of what? My mother? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You were afraid of your mother, so you let me walk into this? I thought I could fix it. How? I planned to change the arrangement after the wedding. I shook my head. You expected me to marry you first and ask questions later? No. That's exactly what you expected. He stood up. I love you. I started crying. I love you too. Then believe me. I looked at him. I can't. That was the first time I saw Daniel cry. But I was crying too. We sat across from each other for nearly an hour. Eventually I asked him one question. Does your mother know you told me? He looked away. I already knew the answer. No. I nodded. Then I need you to do something. What? Don't tell her. He looked confused. Why? Because I want to know what happens if she thinks I still know nothing. Daniel stared at me. What are you planning? I wiped my tears. I'm going to let the wedding happen. He stood up immediately. No. Yes. Emma, that's dangerous. I don't mean physically. I know. I need the truth to come out in front of everyone. He didn't understand, but eventually he agreed. The wedding day arrived. Everything looked perfect. White flowers, golden lights, beautiful music, hundreds of guests. Everyone smiled. Everyone congratulated us. But I felt like I was standing inside a carefully designed trap. Victoria was wearing a stunning silver dress. She looked happier than I had ever seen her. At one point, she walked over to me. You look beautiful, she said. It was the first compliment she had ever given me. I smiled. Thank you. She leaned closer. Today is going to change everything. I looked into her eyes. I know. She smiled, but she didn't understand what I meant. The ceremony went smoothly. Daniel looked nervous. When he saw me walking down the aisle, his eyes filled with tears. For a moment, everything else disappeared. There was only him and me. I remembered why I had chosen him. I remembered why I was still standing there. We exchanged vows. We exchanged rings. And we kissed. Everyone applauded. For a few minutes, I allowed myself to believe that maybe everything would be okay. Then came the reception. Dinner was served. Music played. People laughed. Photographers moved around the room. Then Victoria stood up. She tapped her glass. I'd like to say a few words. Everyone turned toward her. She smiled. Today, my son has married Emma. People applauded. Victoria looked at me. I suppose I should welcome you to the family. More applause. Then she continued. But I think honesty is important. The room became quieter. She took a sip of water. My son has always had high standards. I felt Daniel tense beside me. Victoria smiled. And while Emma is a lovely young woman, we all know she isn't exactly the kind of woman we imagined Daniel would marry. Someone laughed awkwardly. I looked around the room. Nobody knew what to do. Victoria continued. Our family has certain expectations. Then she looked directly at me. Emma, before you become too comfortable, you should understand something. I said nothing. She smiled. Daniel could have married someone much better. The room went silent. I felt hundreds of eyes on me. My hands were shaking. Daniel stood up. Mom, stop. Victoria looked at him. I'm simply being honest. No, you're humiliating my wife. Victoria laughed. Wife? She looked at me. You're married now. Perhaps you should tell her. Daniel froze. Victoria continued, "Tell her what happens if the marriage doesn't work." My heart stopped. She knew I had discovered the documents. But then she said something unexpected. "Tell her that if you leave Daniel, you walk away with nothing." People started whispering. Daniel looked at me. "Emma." I stood up. The entire room became silent again. I could hear my own heartbeat. Victoria smiled. She thought I was defeated. She thought she had finally put me in my place. She had no idea. I reached into the folder I had kept beneath my chair. Then I placed it on the table. "I think it's time everyone understood what this marriage was really supposed to be." Victoria's smile disappeared. Daniel looked at the folder. "Emma." I turned toward the guests. I didn't plan to say anything tonight. I took a breath. But since honesty has become so important, I think everyone deserves the truth. Victoria stepped forward. "What are you doing?" I looked at her. "The same thing you just did." She stared at me. "I'm telling the truth." I opened the folder. "The house Daniel and I were supposed to move into isn't ours." A few people looked confused. "It belongs to the family trust." Victoria's face changed. I continued. "And Daniel only receives control under certain conditions." Victoria said, "That's private." I smiled. "Then you shouldn't have brought it into my marriage." I held up another document. "And here's the prenuptial agreement you wanted me to sign." Someone near the table gasped. "I had my attorney review it." Victoria interrupted. "You had no right." "I had every right." Then I looked at Daniel, and he knew about it. Everyone turned toward him. Daniel lowered his head. His father looked furious. Victoria looked shocked. I continued. "Daniel told me he knew his family wanted this marriage to protect their assets." The room erupted in whispers. Victoria turned toward Daniel. "You told her?" Daniel finally spoke. "Yes." Victoria's face went pale. "How could you?" Daniel looked at her. "How could I not?" For the first time, I saw him stand up to his mother. He walked toward me. "I'm sorry." I nodded. "I know." Then I pulled out another document. "This is the part you didn't know I had." Victoria stared at it. "What is that?" I placed it on the table. "It concerns Lauren Mitchell." Victoria froze. Daniel looked at me. His father stood up. "Where did you get that name?" I turned toward him. "That's exactly what I wanted to know." I explained everything. The financial transfers, the property documents, the connection between Lauren and Daniel, the conversation I overheard, the strange emails. Then I revealed the biggest piece of evidence, a financial record showing that Lauren had received money from one of the family's companies shortly before the wedding. Victoria tried to interrupt. "It's not what you think." I looked at her. "Then explain it." She couldn't. Daniel's father looked at her. "Victoria?" She said nothing. Then Daniel spoke. "Mom, what's going on?" Victoria finally admitted it. Lauren had threatened to expose an old financial arrangement involving the family business. Victoria had paid her to stay quiet. But that wasn't the whole story. Lauren had once been engaged to Daniel. The family had wanted Daniel to marry Lauren because her family was also wealthy. When the relationship ended, Victoria blamed Daniel. Years later, when Daniel met me, Victoria became determined to make sure the new marriage benefited the family financially. She didn't want me. She wanted control. She wanted protection. She wanted Daniel to remain tied to the family, and she believed I was too inexperienced to notice. But there was one more secret. The person who had sent me the anonymous emails was not Lauren. It was Daniel's sister, Claire. Claire stepped forward. Everyone turned toward her. She was crying. "I couldn't watch this happen." Victoria stared at her. "You betrayed your own family." Claire shook her head. "No, I protected my brother." Then Claire looked at me. "I knew what Mom was planning. I knew about the prenup. I knew about Lauren. I knew everything." I asked, "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because I was scared." I understood that. Fear had controlled everyone in that family, but not anymore. Victoria looked around the room. People were no longer looking at her with admiration. They were looking at her with disappointment. Her husband walked away from the table. Daniel stood beside me. He took my hand. "I'm sorry." I squeezed his hand. "But sorry isn't enough." He nodded. "I know." I looked around the room. Tonight wasn't supposed to be about revenge. I paused. It was supposed to be about marriage. I looked at Daniel. "And I still love him." Then I looked at Victoria. "But love doesn't mean surrendering your dignity." Nobody spoke. I continued. "I came into this family willing to love everyone. I was willing to respect traditions. I was willing to compromise." My voice shook. "But I was never willing to be treated like a business transaction." Victoria looked down. For once, she had nothing to say. Then I did something nobody expected. I closed the folder. "I don't want the house." I looked at Daniel. "I don't want your family's money." I turned toward Victoria. "And I don't want revenge." She looked at me. "Then what do you want?" I answered honestly. "I want my husband to choose his own life." Daniel took my hand. "I choose you." Those 4 words meant more to me than any property, trust, or bank account ever could. But the story didn't end that night. The following weeks were difficult. Daniel moved out of his parents' house. He rented a small apartment with me. We started marriage counseling. We also worked with lawyers to completely separate our finances from his family's business. Daniel eventually confronted his father. His father admitted that he had allowed Victoria to control too much for too long. Claire stopped speaking to her mother for several months. And Victoria? She didn't apologize immediately. For weeks, she blamed me. She told relatives that I had humiliated her. She said I had manipulated Daniel. She said I had destroyed the family. But slowly, people stopped believing her. Because the documents existed. The truth couldn't be erased. 6 months later, Victoria finally came to our apartment. She stood at the door. Daniel opened it. She looked older, tired, different. She asked if she could speak to me. I said yes. We sat at the kitchen table. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Then she said something I never expected. "I'm sorry." I looked at her. She continued, "I thought I was protecting my son." I said nothing. "I thought you were going to take him away from us." I finally answered, "I never wanted to take him away from you." She nodded. "I know that now." Then she looked down. "I was wrong about you." I smiled sadly. "Yes, you were." She almost laughed. It was the first honest moment we had ever shared. But forgiveness didn't happen overnight. It took time, a lot of time. Eventually, things became better. Not perfect, but better. Daniel and I stayed married. We built a life that belonged to us. We rented a small house instead of moving into his family's property. We bought furniture slowly. We traveled when we could. We celebrated birthdays with simple dinners. And every now and then, we laughed about how different our lives had become. 1 year after the wedding, Daniel surprised me. He took me back to the restaurant where we had our first date. He got down on one knee. I laughed. "What are you doing?" He smiled, renewing my promise. He said, "The first time I asked you to marry me, I didn't understand how much courage marriage would require." He took my hand. "But now I know." I started crying. He continued, "I promise that no family member, no amount of money, and no fear will ever come between us again." I kissed him. And this time, there was no audience, no mother-in-law, no family pressure, no secret contract, just 2 people choosing each other. Looking back, I sometimes think about that wedding night. I remember standing in that room while everyone stared at me. I remember Victoria's words. Daniel could have married someone much better. For a few seconds, those words made me feel small. But today I realize something. People can only make you feel worthless if you believe their opinion defines your worth. I didn't need to prove that I was better than Victoria. I didn't need to destroy her. I didn't need to take her money. I simply needed to stand up for myself. And that's what I did. The greatest revenge wasn't humiliating her in front of everyone. It wasn't exposing her secrets. It wasn't watching her lose control. The greatest revenge was walking away from the role she had created for me. She wanted me to be the quiet woman who accepted whatever her family decided. Instead, I became the woman who asked questions. She wanted me to sign papers without understanding them. Instead, I read every word. She wanted me to feel like I wasn't good enough. Instead, I realized I never needed her approval. And most importantly, she wanted my marriage to be controlled by money. Instead, Daniel and I built a life without it. Today, when someone asks me what happened at my wedding, I don't tell them about the dress. I don't tell them about the flowers. I don't tell them about the food. I tell them about the moment I realized that sometimes the most important promise you can make isn't a promise to another person. It's a promise to yourself. A promise that you will never allow someone else's fear, jealousy, or greed to decide your worth. And if you're listening to my story because you're going through something similar, I want you to remember one thing. You don't have to scream to be strong. You don't have to destroy someone to win. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stay calm, gather the truth, and wait for the right moment to speak. Because lies can survive for years when nobody questions them. But once the truth walks into the room, it doesn't need to shout. It speaks for itself. And sometimes the person everyone thought would stay silent is the person who changes everything. That was me. I walked into my wedding as a woman they thought they could control. I walked out knowing exactly who I was. And that was worth more than any house, any inheritance, or any amount of money they could ever offer me. Because in the end, I didn't lose a family. I found the truth. I didn't lose my marriage. I saved it. And I didn't get revenge by destroying the people who tried to control me. I got revenge by refusing to become the person they wanted me to be. And that was the day I finally understood something I will never forget. Sometimes the best revenge isn't making someone suffer. Sometimes the best revenge is building a life they can no longer control.